My story is perhaps one of the greatest love stories ever told. And I know it's close to Valentine's Day, so you're thinking maybe it's a Shakespearean tragedy like Romeo and Juliet, or maybe it's the first few moments of the movie Up. But it's something different. It's a story of passion and pain, sin and shame, brokenness and being rebuilt. But let me start from the beginning. It was a successful time in our nation as we occupied the land of the Kingdom of Israel. We were in a time of transition. We finally had occupied it, but we were far from God. So though we had all of these assurances in who we were living as we wanted. And it was an ordinary day for me in this period of time. And so I'm in the marketplace and I'm walking around. The sun is shining. The weather is hot. And there's a crowd of people moving around. And in the middle of this day, I see this man. I encounter him, and I'm kind of trying to mind my own business, not trying to be too crazy. And then he approached me, and he called my name. And at first, I was a little hesitant about seeing him, but I figured maybe he needed directions. I could tell that he wasn't from here, or maybe it would just be like any other business deal that I had done in my life. This moment of my life was like any other, though, a moment that would shape me for the rest of my life. It was in that moment that I felt like someone had actually cared for me, that someone had finally seen me, not for what I could give them or what I could provide, but they had really seen me, who I was. And he had heard me. And maybe, just maybe, beyond that moment, there would be hope for me for something more. You see, for the past few years, I felt empty. I felt alone. I kept trying to fill this void in my heart and in my life. Though that there were people constantly coming and going, I couldn't shake the feeling that at the end of the day, I was alone. Completely and utterly alone. No one really wanted me. I mean, I was Gomer, daughter of Diblaim. The home that I grew up in was broken, and the way that I lived had been modeled to me. My parents taught me that. They taught me how to live the way that I was. But here this man of God, who came to me with kindness in his eyes and warmth in his smile. And he didn't seem to mind at all the mess that I had come from, the mess that I felt like was my life. We were married shortly after we met, and the first few years of our marriage were incredible. He kept preaching and just going after the things of God, and I just kept trying to forget about my past. I tried to bury my insecurities and my shame deep down, and we grew to love each other despite all of those things. I wasn't sure if things could really get any better for us as long as I just kept suppressing those things that I felt about myself. But then my first son was born. And as I held him in my arms, I remember the Lord distinctly said to Hosea, "Call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. And that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel." And as time passed, and I held my son and I raised him, things changed. I thought I'd left the past behind me, but I couldn't help but wonder each day when it would creep back up. I would go to the marketplace and be met with glares. I would look myself at my reflection and wonder what would come of me. When would people find out about who I really was? I felt fake. This fear, it haunted me day and night. And Hosea, he became busier and busier as the nation around us continued to succeed but get farther and farther away from God. He was so focused that he hardly even saw the struggle that I was facing each day to just raise our son. And I started to resent him because of that. I resented the freedom that he had. I couldn't really understand who he was anymore. He was so distant. And our conversations left me feeling empty. Then I conceived again and I gave birth to a daughter. And the Lord said to Hosea, call her Lo Ruhamah, which means not love, for I will no longer show love to Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or by horses and horsemen, but I, the Lord their God, will save them. I thought maybe this would change things for us, but it didn't. It stayed the same. And shortly after that, I gave birth to another baby boy. And the Lord said, call him Lo Ami, which means not my people, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. By that point, it felt like Hosea and I were living completely separate lives. The separation only made it more clear that my commitment to him and our marriage had been wavering since the birth of our son. To be completely honest, I wasn't even sure if some of our kids were his. And he knew that. Everyone knew that. He begged me to stop leaving, and despite his warnings and his failed attempts to keep me out of trouble, I just kept heading down that same path. The path that I knew all too well, that was set out for me by my family, that I continued in, and though he issued every red flag, it meant nothing to me. I just kept going. Of course, there were times when I tried to turn back and fix things, but eventually it just felt beyond repair. It was too hard, so I gave up. It hurt me too badly to look him in the eyes and lie and disappoint. I think my heart ached with the anxiety that as I laid my kids down to sleep at night, wondering if and when they would find out who I really was, where I had come from, what I had done. My friends, they all turned their backs on me. And every time I walked outside my house, I met people who knew who I really was, and I could tell they did. It hurt. I felt like a complete failure as a mom, as a wife, and as a person. There my husband was, my Hosea, chasing after the things of God, and I couldn't stop chasing the things of my past. Can you imagine what it must have been like? Well, eventually I couldn't take that inner agony anymore. And so I devised a plan. In the middle of the night, I was gonna leave, so that way I wouldn't disturb them, that they wouldn't know that I was gone. And I thought to myself, it'd probably be easier for them anyways, and they'd forget about me. They'd keep going on with the things of God, and they wouldn't remember. So I left no note and no trace of me to be found. And I planned to get as far away as I could. So maybe when I got there, no one would recognize me, and I could finally have a fresh start, free from the judgment and the shame that I felt for so long. One thing led to another, and I eventually found myself right in the middle of a marketplace, alone, afraid, and ashamed, about to be sold as a slave. Man, did I really do it this time. The man started auctioning me off to the crowd, but there were no real bids. I mean, why would anyone want me if they knew who I was? If they knew what I had done, I didn't even want me. I was so embarrassed I could barely lift up my head as I stood there in shackles. But then all of a sudden, I heard a voice shouting off from the distance that sounded all too familiar. As it got louder and closer, I began to realize who it was that was shouting. But how? How could it be that he was here? How could it have been him? As I stood there with my face downcast and in disbelief, I heard the auctioneer say sold. And he bought me for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley. And as he handed it over, I knew that that was all he owned. He had given everything to purchase me in that moment that he had. The auctioneer released me from my chains, and when I finally mustered up enough courage to look Hosea in the eyes, the love that I betrayed, the father that I abandoned, what I thought would be looks of disgust and anger or condemnation turned out to be an outpouring of his kindness, his love, and his compassion when his gaze met mine. The man who knew me completely and everything that I had ever done somehow still wanted me. Despite the moments of brokenness and pain, my Hosea had come for me, and he had paid the price in full that I could not pay. And then he brought me into his embrace, and he said, "You are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will behave the same way towards you. And he brought me back. He brought me back to our home and our children, and he restored me completely in my role as his wife and a mother to our kids. It's interesting to find that his name literally means salvation, and mine means completeness. You see, his love for me in that moment was overwhelming. I didn't deserve it. But he gave me a new beginning. And he kept extending grace and love to me time after time. He saved me. And maybe you're here today and you're wondering why all that matters. Why does that love story matter? But let me tell you something. Your Hosea, your salvation has come too. Only his name isn't Hosea. It's Jesus. And I know this because scripture says this is how much God loved the world. He gave his son, his one and only son, and this is why, so that no one need be destroyed. By believing in him, anyone can have a whole and lasting life. God didn't go to all the trouble of sending his son merely to point an accusing finger, telling the world how bad it was. He came to help, to put the world right again. The love and grace that Hosea showed me is just a glimpse of the love that has been extended to you from the moment you were born and took your first breath till now. Jesus has been chasing and calling after you. And maybe you've made some mistakes along the way, like I did. But for too long, you've been staring back at the past, wishing you could change what had happened. You tried to move on, but somehow the past always seems to creep back up on you. Maybe you started a new relationship and it was fun until they wanted to know everything about you. And you were afraid, so you pushed them away. You liked them, but you didn't like yourself. Maybe you got hurt and your family couldn't understand why you hadn't moved on. Or maybe you were so concerned with the opinions of other people and you lost yourself along the way. Whatever the circumstances would be, wherever you are and whoever you are, Jesus hasn't stopped wanting a relationship with you. And he has paid everything that he had for you, his life. He bought you with his blood. And he said that you were worth it. Today, he's calling you to himself. You've been running for a long time, but he's found you right where you are, in the middle of your mess. And you don't have to hide anymore or bury your sin and your shame. He sees it all. He knows it all, and he's already paid the price, and he wants to forgive you. He wants to give you that fresh start and to make you whole. All he needs is just for you to come home to him. So will you?